As a task becomes automated, the parts of the brain involved in conscious reasoning become less active, and other parts of the brain take over. You could call it the okay push-up. The point at which you decide you're okay with how good you are, essentially. Turn on autopilot and stop improving. We all reach okay plateau in most things we do. We learn how to drive when we're in our teens, and then once we're good enough to avoid tickets and major accidents, we get only incrementally better. My father has been playing golf for 40 years, and he still, though it will hurt him to read this, a duffer. In 4 decades, his handicap hasn't fallen even a point. How come? He's reaching okay plateau. Psychologists use the statistic okay plateau mark upper bound of innate ability. In 1869, the hereditary genius Sir Francis Galton argued that a person could only improve at physical and mental activities up until he reaches a certain wall, which he cannot by any education or exertion overpass. According to this view, the best we can do is simply the best we can do. But Erickson and his fellow experts, performance psychologists, have found over and over again that with the right kind of concentration and effort, that's rarely the case. They believe that Galton's wall often has much less to do with our innate limits than simply with what we consider an acceptable level of performance. What separates experts from the rest of us is that they tend to engage in very direct, highly focused routine, which Erickson has labeled deliberate practice. Having studied the best of the best in many different fields, he has found that top achievers tend to follow the same general pattern of development. They develop strategies for consciously keeping out the autonomous stage. Well, they practice by doing 3 things: focusing on their technique, staying goal-oriented, and getting constant and immediate feedback on their performance. In other words, they force themselves to stay in the cognitive phase. Amateur musicians, for example, are more likely to spend their practice time playing music, whereas pros more likely to work with tedious exercise or focus on specific difficult parts of pieces. The best ice skaters spend more of their practice time trying to jump jumps that they learn less often. Well, lesser skaters work more on jumps they've already mastered. Deliberate practice, by its nature, must be hard. When you want to get good at something, how you spend your time practicing is far more important than the amount of time you spend. In fact, in every domain of expertise that's been rigorously examined, from chess to violin to basketball, studies have found that the number of years one has been doing something correlates only weakly with the level of performance. My dad may consider putting into a tin cap in his basement a good forum for practicing, but unless he consciously challenges himself and monitoring his performance, reviewing, responding, rethinking, rejiggering, it's never going to make him appreciatively better. Regular practice is simply enough to improve. We must watch ourselves fail and learn from our mistakes. The best way to get out of the autonomous stage and off to the okay plateau Erickson has found is to actually practice failing. One way to do that is to put yourself in the mind of someone far more competent at the task you're trying to master, and try to figure out how that person works through problems. Benjamin Franklin was apparently an early practitioner of this technique. In his autobiography, he describes how he used to read essays by great thinkers and try to reconstruct the author's arguments. According to Franklin's own logic, he'd then open up the essay and compare his reconstruction to the original words to see how his own chain of thinking stacked up against the master's. The best chess players follow a similar strategy. They will often spend several hours a day replaying the games of grandmasters, one move at a time, trying to understand the expert's thinking at each step. Indeed, the single best predictor of an individual chess skill is not the amount of chess he's played against opponents, but rather the amount of time he spent sitting alone working through old games. The secret to improving at a skill is to retain some degree of conscious control over it, or practicing to force oneself to stay out of autopilot. With typing, it's relatively easy to get past the okay plateau. Psychologists have discovered that the most efficient method is to force yourself to type faster than feel comfortable, and allow yourself to make mistakes. In one noted experiment, typists were repeatedly flashed words 10 to 15% faster than their fingers were able to translate them onto the keyboard. At first, they weren't able to keep up, but over a period of days, they figured out the obstacle that were slowing them down and overcame them, and then continued to type at the faster speed. By bringing typing out of the autonomous stage and back onto their conscious control, they had conquered the okay plateau. Erickson suggested I try the same thing with cards. He told me to find a metronome and try to memorize a card every time I clicked it. Once I figured out my limits, he instructed me to set the metronome 10 to 20% faster than that and keep trying it quicker at the quicker pace until I stopped making mistakes. Whenever I came across a card that was particularly troublesome, I was supposed to make a note of it and see if I could figure out why it was giving me problems. I worked it within a couple of days. I was off the okay plateau, and my card times began falling again at a steady clip. If they're not practicing deliberately, even experts can see their skills backslide. Erickson shared with me an incredible example of this. Even though you might be inclined to trust the advice of a silver-haired doctor over one fresh out of medical school, it's been found that a few fields of medicine doctors' skills don't improve the longer they've been practicing. The diagnosis of professional mammographers, for example, have a tendency to get less and less accurate over the years. Why would that be? For most mammographers, practicing medicine is not deliberate practice. According to Erickson, it's more like putting into a tin cup than working with a coach. That's because mammographers usually only find out about the accuracy of their diagnosis weeks or months later, if at all, at which point they've probably forgotten the details of the case and can no longer learn from the successes and mistakes. One field of medicine in which this is definitely not the case is surgery. Unlike mammographers, surgeons tend to get better with time. What makes surgeons different from mammographers is the outcome of most surgeries is usually immediately apparent. The